So welcome to this re-recording of a presentation did yesterday for the GameDevUtopia community. Here's the agenda for the talk. So a very quick introduction who I am. Then I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to Default, the game engine. Then we're going to talk about tools and choosing the right tool for the job, which will lead us into the topic of game engine due diligence, i.e. choosing the right game engine for the right kind of game and how to do these kind of comparisons between game engines. Then we'll look into some very common developer problems that you will encounter during the development lifecycle of a game. And then we will look at some what I call hidden values in game engines. Some game engines will solve these subtle problems that might come up during development. It's typically things that you don't really see if you look at a feature list of a game engine, rather like neat solutions to various development problems. So let's get going. So first of all, my name is Björn Ritzel. I work for the Default Foundation. I'm also a member of the W3C community group for games. I'm a recurring judge of the JS 13K Games competition, and I'm on the program committee for the JS Game Dev Summit. So for those of you who don't know what Default is, here's a very brief introduction to the game engine and its history. So the standard blurb. So this is Default. It's a completely free to use game engine for development of console, desktop, mobile, and web games. You can find us at default.com. It's a cross-platform game engine, so you can publish for Windows, Linux, Mac OS, iOS, and Android for mobile. You can publish to the web, and also consoles. So we have Nintendo Switch and PlayStation support. PS5 support is coming soon, and we are working on Xbox. The Default Foundation, which is the current owner of the Default game engine, it was handed over to the Default Foundation in 2020. So Default was owned by King from 2014 to 2020. It was actually started, it's an even older game engine, so it started off as a side project for two developers working at Avalanche, so the AAA studio here in Stockholm. So both of them developed a game engine on the side and then realized that they should pool their resources and start a company around Default and try to sell it. And in 2014, Default was acquired by King, so the makers of Candy Crush. And it was used as an internal engine together with the already existing internal engine, which was used for Candy Crush. And in 2016, we made the decision to make the game engine publicly available at GDC, so anyone could download it. It was still closed source, still owned by King. And then over time we realized that in order to take the next step, we needed to separate Default from King and make it into a separate legal entity again. So now it's an independent software foundation. It's based here in Stockholm. The foundation got the trademarks, the source code, and all of the rights to the game engine. It's now developed by a team of 6 developers, and we're funded through initial seed money from King and then donations and corporate partnerships. It is source available, so you can find us on GitHub. And it's, as I said, completely free, so there's no upfront cost, no licensing fees, no runtime fee, very popular nowadays, no rev share, and it's free also for consoles. So as long as you're an approved developer, you will get access to console builds as well, and completely for free. It is a 3D game engine, but the focus has been on 2D tooling primarily, so it supports all of the bells and whistles you can expect from a 2D game engine, so tile maps and sprites and particle effects and 2D physics, but it's, as I said, also a 3D engine, so you can import 3D models using the GLTF format. You can create meshes at runtime, so custom 3D meshes, 3D particle effects, 3D physics. You can build your user interface in Default. It has a full editor and debugger, and we use the Lua scripting language. The engine itself is written in C++ or C++ like C, I'd say. And you can also extend it with additional native code. So we have a plugin system where you can hook in various kinds of native integrations and bind these to Lua so you can access them from your scripting layer. One of the most popular games made with Default is Family Island. It's a game by Melsoft, or rather Moon Active nowadays. It has 50 million installs on Google Play. A nice showcase of what you can do with Default. All right, so let's talk a bit about tools. You have a lot of different tools, and there is this saying that if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail. And you can apply that thinking to some extent to game engines as well. And if you look at various tools, so for 3D modeling you have many different tools. For 2D graphics you have many different, for vector graphics as well, and programming languages, there's a ton of them. And there's also many different game engines. And you should always try to think about the tool to use. You might be very well versed in Unreal Engine, for instance, but that doesn't mean you should use Unreal for all kinds of games. If you are doing a web game, it's probably not a very good choice to use Unreal. You should probably look at a different engine. If you plan to release a game on console, then maybe you shouldn't choose like a web-based game engine such as Phaser, because you will have problems then when you want to release your game on consoles. So you should really use the right tool for the right kind of problem. And that leads us to asking the question, what would be the consequence of making the wrong kind of choice? And I'm going to show two examples here. So the first one, it's a very popular game in 2023. It's Vampire Survivors. So this kind of horde survival game, 2D game with a lot of 2D sprites and effects, and where you level up your character and face increasingly big hordes of enemies. So this took the gamers by storm in 2022 and then also in 2023. So initially it was developed by a single guy in Italy, made in Phaser and released on the web. And then he also managed to release the same web game on Steam. And it became like a runaway hit and really started to attract attention from gamers. So the developer realized that he had a success on his hands, but it was made in a web-based game engine called Phaser, and that is problematic if you want to also release the game on consoles, which was probably the next logical step, and also mobile to some extent. So how would you release Vampire Survivors on mobile and console when it's written in a JavaScript game engine? Well, you have to rewrite everything, and that's what they did. So they remade the game in Unity. The web still uses Phaser, I guess. Re-release on desktop. They released Android and iOS, and Xbox soon after, and then almost a year later, or at least 8 months later, they released on Nintendo Switch. And as far as I know, there is still not a PlayStation release. So at least for them, switching engine was a partial solution. They almost achieved their goal of releasing on all consoles and on mobile. But it was not without cost and time lost. You would really have liked to be able to just release the game immediately on console when you realized what kind of a hit game you had, and not spend another 12 months of porting to a new platform or to a new game engine. So another example is Subway Surfers. So this vertical infinite runner kind of game. It used to be super popular. It was released in 2012 actually, so 12 years now. It had 2.7 billion downloads, so it's a huge success. And it was released on mobile, as I said. So the question is, what would it take to release Subway Surfers on the web? And by the web, I mean something like Poke.com, one of these web game portals where you can play various kinds of mobile games, like back in the Flash era, but much better. And if you go to Poke.com, you will actually find Subway Surfers there, but it is not the Unity version. So, and a bit more about Poke. So it's a big platform. They have players that play both on desktop, but also increasingly so on mobile devices. And web games are expected to load in just a few seconds, which means that the game really has to be small and performant, and you really have to design for the web from the beginning, which means that you must also think about the kind of game engine you have. And Poke measures this kind of impact, size, and performance with a metric they call conversion to play. And it's kind of an interesting and really good idea to measure like this. So from the time where you discover a game, among all of the game icons you see here on the screen, to when you press it, it starts loading, you might hit some menus, and then you're in the game. So how long does that take? And how many players do you lose on the way? So for a generic example on Poke, so for a 10 megabyte game played by a player in the US, you will see around a 20% drop in players from the time they press the icon until they are playing. So that's 1/5 of the player that for some reason drop out. It might be that the game wasn't for them, but it could also be that it's too slow. The loading takes too long, or it doesn't, like, you run into some kind of problem, or you lose interest while waiting. And it's even worse if you take the same game in another region where you have a slower internet connection, such as in Egypt. There you will lose 40% of your potential players just because of the size and because of the loading time. So that's a significant amount of potentially lost income for you as a developer. And why do people not want to wait then? So there is this interesting research from Microsoft that since the year 2000, and that's when the first iPhones came, or like the first mobile revolution basically, you see that the average attention span dropped from 12 to 8 seconds, which means that if nothing happens for 8 seconds, you will lose interest and do something else. So scroll on Twitter or look at something on TikTok instead of waiting for that slow game to load. So we're actually worse than goldfish. It said that they have an attention span of 9 or 10 seconds. So that's really interesting. Players don't want to wait. So what's the solution then? So how can you make that Unity game load in seconds and play well on a mobile device in a browser? Well, you rewrite it again. So in this case, it was rewritten in JavaScript using the Pixie.js rendering backend. It's significantly smaller than the mobile App Store version, so only 7 megabytes, which is still semi-large, and it plays well on mobile. So in this case, switching engine was successful, but it was also, of course, a cost to do this kind of port. So how can we know which game engine is the best for a game? Well, we need to do some game engine due diligence before we, start working on our game. We could, of course, just pick the game engine that we are familiar with. So here's a bunch of game engines, and if you are to choose, what are the various decisive factors? So one could be the familiarity. So there are a lot of users very familiar with Unity, so maybe you should just go for what's popular. Pick that game engine. You will have a lot of learning material and tutorials and a lot of people to ask. So that might be one way of choosing, but it's not necessarily the right way, because we've seen that Unity might not be the best choice for all kinds of games. So even though it's a popular game engine, you might not always choose it, because you will potentially have to port your game, especially if it's a web game. And you could look at features. So if you go to the front page of any of these game engines and look at the feature list, all of them boast like long lists of impressive features. But But the question is, do you need all of these? And what kind of impact do these features have on the install size of your game? And can you strip out the stuff that you don't need? And what's the build time if you have like a huge game engine with a lot of features? Will it build slower? Possibly. It depends. So you could look at features, but you should, if you do, then you should focus on what features do I need for my specific game, not which game engine has the most features, because that might not be of any use to you. It might actually be a hindrance. We could also take a look at like the kind of genre and platform that we want to release on. So if you do a 3D game, you have a lot of good choices. So Unreal is obviously a really good choice for 3D games. Unity as well. Godot has good 3D support. Default is a 3D engine, but we lack a bit of tooling. And others are not really a good choice at all. And for a 2D game, you could probably use almost any game engine. Unreal, sure, you can do a 2D game, but it's not what it's designed for. So it's probably the wrong choice if you want to do a 2D game to pick Unreal. And if you want to do like a web game, then the size is really important in most cases. So then you should probably pick like a web-based framework such as Phaser. Or you could pick Default, which actually is a really small and performant game engine also on the web. And what if you want to release on console? Then most game engines have you covered to some extent. Default doesn't have Xbox support, but it's coming. Most others have full support. Coco's got Nintendo Switch support recently. And Godot, for instance, they have support for all consoles, but it's not free. And you have to either, you have to pay for access or work with a porting company. So we didn't necessarily get much wiser by doing this kind of check. So maybe there are other things that matter when you choose a game engine besides familiarity and feature lists. So we could also ask ourselves, what are the day-to-day struggles of game developers overall? And in my 20 or so years, I've come across a lot of things while developing games in small or large teams. And some of the things, I'm sure you are familiar with some of them. So long build times. So from the time you make a change until you can actually see it running in your game, it can take hours in some cases, and that really kills productivity. You could have a game engine that constantly introduces breaking changes, so you always have to play catch up. You could have really big executables, and that's not always optimal to have a super large executable that you need to install and ship. You could be reliant on external tools such as Xcode, and if those are updated, it could be a pain to do all of these updates. And sometimes game engines say that they are cross-platform, but there is still a lot of effort involved in releasing on multiple platforms. So let's break it down and look at these. And in Default's case, I believe that we provide a lot of hidden value by actually solving some of these problems that you saw on the previous page. So if we are talking about truly cross-platform game engines, then Default is for sure a truly cross-platform game engine. You should be able to export to all platforms from a single codebase. So we provide cross-platform APIs wrapping the underlying platform-specific APIs. So we have a high-level rendering API that takes care of whatever underlying rendering backend you have. For in-app purchases and mobile phones, you don't really have to care about if it's Google or Apple or something else. We have a standardized API on top of the platform-specific ones. And the same goes for file operations, networking, input capabilities with gamepads and joysticks and keyboard and mouse and touch and so on. And when it comes to updating external tools, so in Default we solve this by saying that we have a zero setup policy, which means that you should only have to download Default once and do nothing more. There are no external dependencies. So we provide pre-built engine binaries. Unless you have native plugins, then we can also build those for you in cloud builders, so you don't have to set up any additional tools. So no Xcode or Android Studio, no additional command line tools required. You can bundle to all platforms from our editor or from the command line. So truly cross-platform, truly without any external dependencies. Just download one executable, which is the editor or the command line tools if you prefer, and then you can do a build to whatever platform. To battle with constantly dealing breaking changes, constantly dealing with breaking changes in the engine, we also say that we really focus on never introducing breaking changes. So you should not really have to worry about it. And we solve this by having a very strict design process and iterative releases. So we are very, very careful about our API design, and we have a relatively small API surface, which is fairly simple to maintain for us. We never remove a released feature, or if we do, we offer good migration steps, automatic preferably. We try to never break an API. It happens, but it's very infrequent. Last year we had 2 breaking changes introduced, and neither of them were major. We also try to do a very iterative development process. So if we have a new feature, we try to implement it in steps, and first just launch like the minimum viable product, and then get player feedback or user feedback before we do like the full implementation. We also try to release often, so we usually have a monthly release and a 2-week beta period, and that lets us gradually and iteratively improve and release new versions of the game engine without breaking stuff. And we collect feedback along the way. On the topic of large executables, we always say that we put performance first and that size matters. So we always design for size and speed and memory consumption and battery as well for mobile. So we have a very carefully crafted engine core written in C++ like C. We are very strict about memory allocations and added features, and we always compare from release to release what impact any change we have do on the executable size. And that makes us actually significantly smaller than many competing game engines, and it also makes us a viable game engine for web games. And on mobile, there is some correlation between the size of your APK or your build and the conversion rate. So there is a study that claims that for every 6 megabyte increase in the size of the application, you lose 1% of installs. So fairly significant, especially if your app grows for, say, 30 megs just by choosing the wrong game engine and the wrong compression formats or whatever, then you lose like 5% of your conversion rate. So it's really important to have a small game engine also on mobile. And for long build times, we always try to introduce iterative workflows where the goal is to reduce build time or completely remove them. So we have something called hot reload, so you can make changes to assets and code and shaders, and by a key press you can recompile that specific resource, and it will be pushed to a running version of the game on a device or on your computer, and you will be able to see the change basically instantly. And also we are very careful about like the build process overall, and doing incremental builds so that you should have sub-second build time for most kind of changes, because having to wait for builds is really a killer to productivity and creativity. So these are some of the hidden values that I believe that Default solves for you, and it might not be something you see when you just take a quick glance at the web page of a game engine, like how are these kind of issues solved. You don't necessarily see these things in a feature list or as very advertised on the front page, but these are some of the things that we have encountered during our years as game developers and that we try to solve in default. So as a final example, going back to a case study, we have a game called Void Scrappers. It's also one of these horde survival games. It's made in default by a developer called 8-Bit Skull. So he released the game on the web and on desktop, and it became fairly successful. And then the question was, how could he take this game and also release it on consoles, and specifically Nintendo Switch, which is a really good fit for this kind of game. So in this case, the developer just did it. He didn't have to do any changes, and it was available without much effort on the Nintendo Switch eShop fairly instantly, without much effort in importing, actually. So that's what I had to say today. I thank you for your attention. If you do have any questions, feel free to get in touch with us on our webpage, on Discord, Twitter, or directly on our user forum. So thank you for listening, and bye.